Welcome into the Day After Podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. We are sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com. The day after, that means Buck Sanders. That means Jason Staples. And as I call my stats up, I see 45 Notre Dame, 32 North Carolina Buck. We had a lengthy discussion off air trying to decide how to make this podcast worthwhile to our listeners. But I'm going to start like we always do. Your overall thoughts on what you saw in Kenan Stadium, 3:30 yesterday, under a absolute picture-perfect football weather game.
Absolutely. I think pretty much a lot of people have had the same thoughts. If you've watched Taylor's take on the game and Taylor Vippolis and some other people, I think most of us have had the same thoughts, which is we've had some questions answered by this game, right? We've all asked ourselves, does the offensive line, is there a chance it's going to come together and be decent this year? Well, the answer we have right now is cloudy and not a chance in hell. Uh, and so, you know, we're getting some answers about this team right now. And the second thing is defense. Are they going to be able to field a decent defense? Well, if giving up less than 500 yards is in your wheelhouse for good defense, they might get there this year. But those are two things that we know, that the defense is not very good, the offensive line is not very good, and Drake Maye is phenomenal. And Jason and I were talking off air, and one of the things that was critical in this game that did not materialize was the running game. North Carolina has not been good running the ball this year for the most part. They've had some games where they had some pretty decent yardage, but a lot of times those came on 70-yard runs and the like. But they weren't able to run the ball against Notre Dame. That put a lot more pressure on Drake Maye, who's on track to have 64 touchdowns this year. And 4 interceptions, 64 TDs, 4 picks.
A few too many fumbles, though.
Yeah, a few too many fumbles. And, people would say, well, he had that against some lesser competition. He had 5 against Notre Dame. And, he's got huge numbers of weapons, really, in the wide receiver corps. Antoine Green came in and looked like Julio Jones on his best day ever. So, we got a really good quarterback, some real good weapons catching the ball, can't run the ball, bad defense, and the offensive line is not very good. So if you want takeaways, that's mine.
Jason, I said, and I thought it had to be on Drake Maye's shoulders. I didn't think Carolina would run the ball against Notre Dame. 66 total yards. Maye leads the way there with 36. Amarion Hampton, just 28. George Pettaway, who we all thought would have a good game in some form. Maybe they would scheme to get him some touches in space. Negative 2 yards rushing and 1 catch for 3 yards. We got a lot to talk about. I said before the show started, I'd like to do it in a way that we're not just sitting here yelling at clouds, but I tell you what, there's plenty to yell about if you're a Carolina football fan trying to watch this team play. But your general takes, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, I think the first takeaway here is I wish I were surprised. And in some ways, that's actually the both the bad and the good news. I think it's more good news than bad in the sense that we didn't see anything against Notre Dame that we've not seen all year. This has been the same Carolina team that we've seen all year. And it's a Carolina team that was 3-0 coming into this game. So, I think that Notre Dame team is the best team that Carolina will play this year. And that game still doesn't change my outlook for the season for this North Carolina team, which is that this is a team that should contend to win the Coastal. I still think this is a team that has every opportunity to go out there and win 8 games or more. There's some things they absolutely need to clean up that got further exposed by Notre Dame. but I'm not sure how many teams on the schedule can line up and do to them some of the things that Notre Dame did. And if you want the real good news from the day, just take a look around the Coastal. Look what happened to Miami, or look what happened to Miami against Middle Tennessee State, which that game, by the way, 45-31 was not a fluke. Middle Tennessee State averaged 8.3 yards per play and held Miami to 4.1. So coming out of this day, yeah, you'd like to see Carolina play a lot better against Notre Dame. But do you really feel worse about Carolina's chances of, say, beating Miami after what happened yesterday? I don't. Like I said, there's a lot of things that need to be cleaned up. There's still some bodies on this roster that can clean some of those things up. So, the question is whether or not they're going to get some of that stuff fixed to be able to continue to improve enough, because teams have to improve over the course of the season to be able to beat some of the teams that they still should beat. So, I think they've got to get better on the line of scrimmage. Everything Buck said about running the football and having Notre Dame run the football on you. I mean, Notre Dame had 51 carries for 287 yards and, not including sack yardage, 5.9 yards per rush, I think it was. Looking at it now. Not including sack yards, 5.9 yards per rush. That's not going to get it done. And, maybe the most concerning thing for me was not even that. It was that there were signs that guys in that defensive front, and it's not just one, I'm talking about just across the board, there's signs that guys were satisfied with the job that they were doing. Okay, that part's concerning. That's the part that I look at and I go, guys, if you're happy with how things look across the board, if you feel like you just, as long as you're doing your job or whatever, and yeah, I want you to commit to doing your job only. But if you feel like, if you're satisfied with anything about what happened last night or yesterday, that's more concerning on the defensive side. But I think there's still room to feel like this team can do some things in conference. I think that Notre Dame team is better than a lot of people. And I said this coming in, and I was so hoping to come into this day after podcast and have to eat a heaping plate of crow. But I was convinced coming in that was an underrated Notre Dame team, that's a good football team. That's a really good football team that played Ohio State, who I think is one of the 3 truly elite programs, maybe 4 truly elite programs in the country this year. They went toe-to-toe with them for 3 quarters. That's a good football team. And we saw that. We saw Carolina just not be able to measure up to that. But I don't think there's anybody else on their schedule that's like that Notre Dame team.
Buck, that's sort of my thing here. And look, Carolina was brutally bad yesterday, and we can talk about it. And to the point of discussing will they get better, I guess in the first 4 weeks, I know Max said, ask me after game 12 if we got better. But, Jason used to always say about dots, right? Well, Florida A&M was a dot. App State was a dot. Georgia State was a dot. Notre Dame was a dot. So now we're getting a line and a trend, and I haven't seen any improvement across the defense. There's guys that are playing well. There's guys that make some plays. But, Buck, that's the most concerning thing, I think, for the fan base, for anybody watching, is that where have they gotten better this year? They dang sure didn't get better during the bye week. And somebody needs to say 87's an All-American. Somebody might want to figure out who that guy is. He ran free all day.
The eye discipline in the back 7 was so bad.
It was unbelievable to watch. And I sit in 209. I have that angled view where you can see perfectly. I love that view. And I watched 87 a lot. The dude didn't have anybody violate the COVID space restrictions on him hardly at all game long. But where's the hope there? I know it's the hope that gets you, and this is a long question, which I'm known to. But where's the hope for this team to do what Jason mentioned is still possible?
The thing that confuses me, and I mean this sincerely, I'm not trying to be cute about this at all, is that I don't understand what they're doing defensively. I don't understand it. If you're sending 4 guys to get the Notre Dame quarterback, to pressure the quarterback, against an offensive line that is first class, they got a really good offensive line, and you're going to send 4 guys to get a quarterback who I'm not sure. Maybe Nathan Elliott might be as good a quarterback as this guy. I don't know. He's not that good. I will never buy the fact that this Drew Pine is Joe Montana in disguise, has been roaming the Notre Dame bench. And he's throwing the football to a cell tower that's just coming down the line wide open.
Cell tower.
What chance do you have of stopping that, right? I mean, if you're going to send 4 guys that are going to do nothing but just get pushed around, on the offensive line, they're never going to get close to the quarterback. The only times they ever got close to him is when they sent Power Eccles on a blitz. Well, here's an idea. Maybe do that a little more often, maybe more than once or twice a game. Send 5 guys instead of 4. You might have to pay for it on the back end, but how could it be worse than what you're seeing now? So that's the thing that confuses me, is I just don't know what they're doing defensively.
What are we doing here, Jason? What are they doing defensively? Like I mentioned about Maye, he was literally wide open all day. Maybe a couple times. He caught 7 balls for 88 yards or something. He made some great catches, and one of the catches was he was pretty helpfully covered by, I believe it was Power Eccles. It's just massively outsized there. But let's talk about the back 7. You mentioned eye discipline. We can talk about the front 4 not getting pressure, but what's happening? There's no press coverage. We talked about that last week. I think your quote was, "What's the point?" So what is Gene Chizik and his crowd hoping to accomplish?
So they actually tried a few things in this game, and what they were trying to do primarily was line up in ways that gave them an extra box defender to try to stop the run. That was their commitment. Their concern was less about getting after the quarterback and bringing blitzes to get after the quarterback and that sort of thing, and more about making sure that they had good run fits across the board. Making sure that you got 7 gaps or 8 gaps, you got to make sure that you're getting guys downhill into those gaps so Notre Dame can't run the football. That's what they're trying to do. Now, the deeply concerning thing is that Notre Dame was able to run the football close to at will despite that. Now, as soon as that's the case, as soon as you're committing 7.5, I mean, I say 7.5 because a lot of times they were in a quarters look or a cover 7 look where one of the safeties, if there's a run play, actually is supposed to come downhill on that side and be an 8th run box defender. And if it's a pass, he's not. And they actually then they recognize that. And you got to give Tommy Rees a tip of the cap, because they recognized what Carolina was doing defensively. And if I could have drawn up a game plan to take advantage of some of the problems that I'd seen on the Carolina defense through 3 games, it couldn't have looked much better than what Tommy Rees did, given what Notre Dame has offensively, where what they did is, there's the one play, the deep shot that they hit over the top of the safety, that deep post. We talked every year whenever Carolina plays Pitt, we talk about post alert. You're going to have a safety that's going to step up on play action, throw it over his head. You're going to have these big boy post opportunities. Well, Carolina was in that coverage, and they ran the play action. And because they've been able to have success running the football, you got a guy step up, and you got the post right behind him. You got no shot, put the ball on location. It's touchdown. Same stuff. So that tells you a little bit about what they're trying to do defensively. The problem is, if you're going to do that stuff, if you're going to commit to that sort of thing, you have to be able to stop the run well enough to compensate for that. And 5.9 yards per rush and a 60% rushing success rate on the day for Notre Dame. That means Notre Dame, when they ran the ball, got the amount of yardage that they would want to running the football for down and distance 60% of the time in this game. as opposed to Carolina 32%. That means that what they're trying to do in that wasn't very successful. They weren't getting wins at the point of attack on the defensive line and with the linebackers. And then that really started messing with the linebackers' eyes. So, you mentioned Power Eccles. Eccles had a really rough day. And I mean, he after he watches the film, he'd tell you the same thing, because there were so many times where Eccles basically was trying to come downhill to his gap. And then you see his responsibility, who's Michael Maye, running across his face, going the opposite direction. And again, this is an example of the offense taking advantage of being able to be balanced, where it looks like it's going to be, say, zone or counter right. And what are you doing? You're leaking the tight end across the eyes, across the responsibility of the guy who's responsible for that gap on the front side. Well, now you're going to try to pull a guy across him and beat him backside. And by the time he's stepped toward his gap, the tight end's already passed him going the other direction, and now he's running behind him. Those are tough responsibilities. They put linebackers and safeties in conflict all day. And Carolina's defenders, first of all, the defensive line wasn't able to create enough havoc themselves to allow some of those back seven guys to focus a little bit more on the pass. And then the back seven guys were so eager to try to help against the run that they ended up getting in those conflicts and weren't able to cover. So it's a tough situation. I do think, you'd like to see maybe some other things from the defense, but I think it's really hard when your defensive line is not creating havoc against a team like this. It's gonna make everything else hard, no matter what you do. If you commit to blitzing guys and all of that, you're always going to be in a tougher situation when you're getting beat up front. The one positive, and there is one defensively in terms of all of this, is Notre Dame in power rushing. So these are short yardage situations where it's a 3rd and 1 or 3rd and 2, and they need to get 2 yards. In power rushing, they were actually only 3 for 11 on the day, 27. So their success rate when things were normal was 60%, but their success rate in power scenarios was only 27%, which is not ideal. It's not great. You'd like that to be 0, but realistically against that team, it's not going to be. 27%, getting wins on 8 out of 11 short yardage situations in the running game. I actually think that does show some growth from Carolina up front and in the running game. So maybe if there's a silver lining defensively, it might be that, but not good enough on the standard downs. They were able to run at will otherwise. And, that was that.
So basically, when they knew they were running, when Carolina absolutely knew they were running, Carolina could hold up against it. But if there were any doubts in there, that's when they worked the Carolina defense.
On a couple of those short yardage situations, they had Travis Shaw in there.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones that I noticed, there was 2 or 3 that they had Shaw in there. He just stoned the middle of that line. Nobody was getting past him.
That 4th and 1 stop was a great example of that. I mean, if you go back and you look at that offensive guard that he's up against, or I think it was the guard. I don't think it was the center. The guard is about a half a yard into the backfield on that play.
Yeah, it was going nowhere. The one thing I'll take exception with, Jason, which I almost never do, is Tommy Reese being a terrific offensive coordinator. I think the jury is still out on that, because if whatever play you call works, then everybody's going to look pretty good. Call the run, it works. Call the pass, it works. Go deep, go short, go medium, do whatever you want to do. You're going to look good. I mean, North Carolina, we talk about this all the time in the past, that teams try to make the other team left-handed. Take away from them the thing they like to do the best, and then just hammer them on it, and then let them do the other things that they don't do as well, because they're not going to do them as well. And this game and in every other game so far this year, which is why I asked the question, what are we doing on defense? North Carolina's not making any choices on defense. They're allowing teams to do whatever they want to do, and just that's how it is. I see that Dr. Strangelove has a comment he wants to get in here, so have at it.
Yeah, I think that point is absolutely dead on, and this is where I did find myself at different points during the game frustrated with what the Carolina defense was, what Chizik and the staff were asking them to do, in the sense that I found myself saying, okay, what are you trying to force them not to be able to do? Like, where are you dictating to the offense? Because I saw none of that. And this is where, if you are giving up 5.9 yards a rush, and there was that one drive where Notre Dame ran the football 12 straight times down the field for a touchdown. They didn't pass. When a team's doing that to you, at a certain point, I think it's worth saying, okay, look, if we can't force them to not be able to do anything, then we're going to have to change our approach. If they're going to line up and just run the ball here, then go 9 in the box, play zero coverage. And this is where I think, Buck, you and I are in agreement of, if they're going to pound you like that, then you know what? Just line up one-on-one on the outside, and if your corner gets beat for a big play, then you got the ball back for your offense, same result. And let's make this into a track meet, but definitely don't just let them kill you by slow death the whole way down the field, because you're trying to play balanced on defense. So I think that's where your point is absolutely dead on, that in terms of Carolina's approach, it's not clear to me that they've decided that they're trying to take anything away from anybody. They're trying to be good across the board. And, we're going to line up and we're going to try to go 7.5 in the box here, line up and be sound defensively, and then try not to give up big plays on the passing game, while also having some extra run support, instead of, okay, look, you're lining up and pounding us in the running game. We're going to put 9 in the box, play zero, and we're not going to let you do that one thing. And if you do this other thing, then we'll tip the cap. I don't see much of that, which is really my preferred way of playing defense. And that I think might be the most frustrating thing about what we saw in terms of the defensive side.
Yeah, that estimate, he just estimated how many yards he wanted per carry. And if they had 9 in the box, when he built up a little bit of head of steam, it took 4 guys to bring him down. They just weren't getting him to the ground with just one guy. So if they had 9 in the box, then maybe he would have just averaged 6 yards a carry. But do something. I mean, literally, I wasn't being facetious. Tommy Rees could not make a bad call in this game. Whatever he chose to do worked. And that, I think, was more about North Carolina's defense than it was his brilliance as an offensive coordinator.
Well, when the first thing that you're doing, when your right-handed stuff is working, then you can cross over to the left hand, right? When your crossover is also working, then you can pull the step back, right? There's all sorts of things. But if you force a guy to go left, then at least you've limited some of that. And I think that's the thing. What I saw was Rees was able to complement, the early success that they had on some things with all that other stuff. And, it was just continuing to keep Carolina's defense off balance on, okay, well, we've had success doing this. Now we're going to build with this complementary thing into that other thing. And it was consistently the right thing at the right time. But I think your point's exactly right. And again, I think that's been the most frustrating thing about watching Carolina's defense all year, has been the willingness to just kind of die a slow death while not forcing the issue and not dictating and not playing aggressive football on that side of the ball, and not forcing an offense. I mean, I think so much of football and so much of the mentality that you want to instill in your team on both offense and defense is you want to be the one dictating to the other team what they can and can't do. And Carolina's been content defensively to be dictated to and to try to respond to that, and it's not gone so well.
That you nailed it right there. They've been content to do that. That's the thing I've always said is make a decision, right? The roads are littered with squirrels that could not make a decision. You know,
that sounds like one of mine, Tommy.
you can use it. I will.
All
give it
right,
to
I
you.
got that in the bank.
Retirement's been good to you, Tommy.
It is, but my thing is to your point, Jason, is Notre Dame didn't do anything differently than they've done all year. I've watched the Ohio State game. I watched most of the Marshall game, and I watched a little bit of the Cal game. They didn't do anything they do differently. They just lined up and did, like you said, what they wanted to do. I wholeheartedly agree with the point of just load the box and put your corners out there. Tony Grimes and Storm Duck, you want to be good? Here's your chance. Man up on your guys. Somebody, for God's sake, cover the best tight end in the country, even if you're in his area.
Well, I actually
then let
think
'em
Bowers is better, but that's my personal preference.
It's close. It's two different type guys.
As
Mayer's
a
more of a
receiver,
traditional guy.
yeah, as a receiver, Bowers is a more dangerous threat. But as a traditional kind of inline blocker plus everything else, Mayer's probably the best total package. There were some times in blocking it was comical watching him. He's blocking your nickel and some of these other guys, and I was watching going back and looking at replay stuff of like, why in the world? That's why that seam got open, is you had a guy that was 190 pounds lined up, responsible for this gap, and a 265-pound guy who can move is the one blocking him. Well, yeah, that's going to open up a seam now. And the fact that
I didn't mean to distract you, Tommy. You were making a point.
Tommy, the fact that they stayed in nickel.
It reminded me of the dime coverage when Miami in the Fedora era. Miami was in power run on the goal line, and Carolina was in dime. That reminded me of that. I mean, that's the thing is we can talk about the physicality of it. Notre Dame's got grown men. Mayer's a grown man. Their offensive line, blah blah. It's the same thing they've heard for years about this, which is that's another point. Has Carolina not developed that to be able to combat that? But to your point, Jason, and I think that's the takeaway from this game is they did nothing different. We can talk about the players not performing. That's on the coaches, right?
100%.
And to that point, if I could jump in here real quick, the thing I thought about, Jason brought up the Miami game. And we sit around and we talk about, the Notre Dame, they have a different quality of athlete on the offensive line. They're all 4- and 5-star guys and this, that, and the other. They're out-talenting North Carolina at that point. You think Middle Tennessee State had more 4- and 5-star people on their roster than Miami?
Sure looked like it.
They didn't. The answer to that question is no, they did not. But they outplayed them. And that's happened how many times so far this season? I mean, it almost happened in North Carolina twice, Georgia State and Appalachian State. Neither one of those teams have anything close to the – if you consider recruiting to have any relevance at all in terms of rankings and so forth, they just don't have the talent that North Carolina does. But somebody is responsible for communicating to these players a job that needs to be done, and is also responsible for motivating them and instilling in them work habits and all those kinds of things. That's what they're paid to do. That's why they are coaches, is to do those things. And, a team like Middle Tennessee State comes into Miami, drinks their milkshake, and laughs on the way out. They're getting paid, I don't know how much they paid them to come down and play. I'm guessing, between $500,000 and $1 million at least to come down there and whoop them in Miami. So what is that all about? How did Middle Tennessee pull that off? Coaching is how they pull that off. And So when we start talking about the impact of coaching, and we're ready to give some slack to people because North Carolina doesn't have the offensive line that Notre Dame has, well, there's a reason for that, and let's look at it and do something about it instead
Yeah,
of doing the same thing over and over again.
Well, in terms of athletes, I mean, North Carolina the last 3 years has not been all that far behind Notre Dame in terms of quality of players that they've recruited.
Well, they moved up this year. There's only 6 spots difference. They're 10th in overall team ranking, team talent, and North Carolina's 16, according to 24/7.
Yeah, so I mean that's
19
right.
and 19, they were a big gap there.
Yeah, that means they're in basically a comparable talent tier. Now Carolina's talent is a little younger, but the thing is Notre Dame, and we talked about this last year when they played Notre Dame, and the year before. Notre Dame is an established culture. That's a program. They've built that program to where that's established when when they've got new starters for a new year. Those guys are replacing old starters who did things the right way, who bought into the specific culture of the program, and they play a certain way. And Notre Dame has a clear brand of football.
Say what you will about Notre Dame, that's on point right there.
Yeah, they have a clear brand of football, and they're going to play their game, and they're going to do it really well. I'm just, and I think so far the frustrating thing is that Carolina has a clear brand of football at this point in the Mac Brown era. And that is that they're going to play. They're going to make some numbers change on offense, but defensively, you do not see the level of physicality, the chip on the shoulder kind of play between the whistles. You see plenty of chips on the shoulder after the whistle, and you don't see defenses that are dictating to the other team. You see a lot of catching, and that's frustrating. And thinking about what would you do differently against Notre Dame? To be totally honest, the thing that I would point to first and foremost, aside from cultural issues, which I think there's some culture problems on defense. I mean, you could see that with one player going, basically almost coming to blows with the teammate, and more than one teammate, basically trying to pull players apart. That shows you some locker room issues there. But then, yeah, I know it's heat of battle and you're frustrated that you're getting beat and all that, but still, when I look at what what could they have done differently? Well, how about lining up with some of the 5 defensive line packages that we saw last year? Now, look, last year's defense wasn't a whole lot better, right? But this is to your point, Buck. Okay, what you're doing right now is not working. You have a nickel package in against standard personnel, and they are putting big bodies out there, and they are just leaning on you. You've got to get other big bodies out there to force them to do something else. And I think replacing a nickel with an extra big body up front and seeing what you can do there, maybe playing single high out of that. Yeah, you maybe give up a couple big plays as a result, but you know what? You're still giving up touchdowns either way. So that's the stuff that, I agree. I agree with both of you. They've got to figure out how to get personnel on the field to be able to stop teams from just being able to run the football and do what they want. When it's not working, you've got to have you've got to have an adjustment in the pocket of, okay, if we can't stop them this way, then here's what we're going to do.
Yeah. That's to that point is if you get beat, I think Miami gave up 4 or 5 75-plus yard plays. But those are the type plays, okay, you got me, right? Those 10, 12 play drives where they run it down your gut, those are the soul-taking drives, right? That's what leads to dudes fighting on the sidelines. When you can't do anything and the man's he's toe-to-toe with you and he's whipping your butt. That's what happens when you want to fight everybody out there. I mean, that's just that. And Carolina had 2 weeks to get ready for Notre Dame. Mac Brown has been awful on the bye weeks. Buck, we mentioned it on the pregame show. Have they come close? And Notre Dame's been now 3 of them, I believe. 2 weeks to prepare for a Notre Dame team that's going to come in. We talked about Drew Pine's terrible this and that. They're going to run the football, and they did exactly what they wanted to do with no adjustments. And we can talk about simple tweaks, but Jason, to your point, DeAndre Boykins is a good player.
He is.
He has no shot against a guy 50 and 60 pounds heavier than him when he has to go try to block him or eat up a block or make a play on him or cover him. It just doesn't work. And then you have all these defensive linemen that we've heard about ad nauseum sitting over there watching the 4 that are on the field getting worked. That's on the coaches, period. Whether it's Chiswick, it's ultimately Mack, Cross, Blythe, Thigpen, whoever you want to throw in the mix. Charlton Warren's got to be wondering what he's gotten himself into. I don't know. I want to talk about something positive, and we're going to do that because I can't start Sunday mornings off all negative. It's supposed to be a good day.
So you want to talk about Drake Maye?
We're going to talk about Drake Maye, but first I'm going to talk about Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com.
And what was I wearing yesterday there, Tommy?
I was going there. Buck Sanders
right.
repping the nice little the soft shirt. I don't know what kind of material
vintage.
It is. The vintage. We'll call it vintage with the old school ram on it. Saw a lot of that in Bowles parking lot. A lot of the old school stuff. Johnny T-Shirt's got you handled, man. They do a fabulous job of having in stock and having available stuff that Carolina people want. A lot of people like the old school ram. You want to talk about some old school defense? Go get you some old school Johnny T-Shirt gear with the old school logos on it. They take care of every sport, not just football, basketball. The jerseys are in for the NIL jerseys on basketball. Armando Baycott walking around doing his Wells Fargo thing in the Bowles lot with a red jersey on. There's got to be a blue logo for Wells Fargo out there somewhere. But Johnny T-Shirt has everything blue covered. Go see them on Franklin Street. Order it online. They take care of you if you're a premium subscriber, which you have to be at this point. 10% off your order. National Guys Pay the Bills audio. This is the day after. We're back. Day after podcast. Buck Sanders, Jason Staples. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley, and of course, the aforementioned Johnny T-Shirt. Let's talk about something positive. I will not get out of this podcast all completely negative. I've got too much negativity in my life when we're talking about the defense. Buck, you mentioned it earlier. Drake Maye is on pace for 64 touchdowns.
And 4 picks. Don't forget the 4 picks.
64-4.
I'm glad I took the over on the 30 touchdowns for the year.
Yeah,
really.
Probably a good move.
He has moved up to 22nd, did you say, all time?
22nd, yeah. He passed Chris Kupek on the career passing touchdown list. Tied with Nick Vidovic with 17 career touchdowns. So he's 22nd all time now after 4 games.
We mentioned the fumble, and that fumble was a killer there, start the second half. But, Buck, this guy is running for his life, or he's got pressure on most plays. He rarely makes a bad decision 4 games into his career. Just speak to Maye. I mean, I said before the game it's going to be on Drake Maye to win it. I didn't think he would have to score 50, but I think that's where we are at this point for Carolina football.
Yeah, no, and the thing that is really most impressive, I think, we just found out yesterday. We've seen a lot of quarterbacks that can throw 4 touchdowns and over 300 yards against, Georgia State or Appalachian State or this team or that team. But Notre Dame is not accustomed to giving up 5 passing touchdowns. The passes he threw to Antoine Green has got to be just ecstatic that he's got Drake Maye throwing him the football, because 3 catches for 150 yards, averages 50 apiece. The fact that Drake can do it against a team like Notre Dame, and Notre Dame is certainly no slackers when it comes to getting pressure. 99, whoever the heck he is. I think he was only on the game on 3 snaps, and he got 2 sacks out of those. They had defensive line that was awesome. Get pressure on him all the time. and yet and no picks. Did not throw a pick. 5 touchdowns, over 300 yards. That performance yesterday, I think we can now take off the perhaps label off of Drake Maye. I think we can for sure say now that Jason was right at the beginning of the year when he said he was a real deal. If he can do it against Notre Dame, there's nobody he's going to face on our schedule that's going to be tougher than them in terms of pass protection. So,
and he didn't even play well. That's the other thing. I mean, in terms of what he can do, he missed some throws that were just the result of sloppy mechanics. That fumble was the result of sloppy mechanics, having one hand on the ball and instead of two in the pocket in that situation. Different things. If he just cleans up some of the fundamentals in terms of mechanics and other things, he missed some routine throws in this game that he could have made. And I can tell you, he's going to watch film and be like, man, I could have thrown for about 7 touchdowns in this game because he just had opportunities that he missed. He didn't even play that well, and yet still, I'm gonna pull in something else in terms of what we saw earlier this year from this Notre Dame defense. This Notre Dame defense played Ohio State again, which just in case anybody else, in case any of our listeners have not watched Ohio State or have not watched any or are unaware of any football outside of the state of North Carolina, Ohio State's passing game is pretty good, right? You got C.J. Stroud, who's, he's a Heisman contender for a reason. And then you've got the best wide receiver room in the country, by a mile. The only other receiver room that probably is in the same breath right now is Wake Forest, which is just insane to say. But, you've got Marvin Harrison Jr., you've got Egbuka, you've got, JSN, you've got all these guys. And C.J. Stroud was 24 of 34 for 223 yards, 6.6 yards per completion is what I'm looking at. 2 touchdowns, no picks. It's a respectable outing, but they held Notre Dame held Ohio State's passing game in check. And then you look at North Carolina against them. Drake Maye, 17 of 32. So again, some of those misses, that 53% completion percentage, some of those misses are on there. But 301 yards and 5 touchdowns. They did some work on the offensive side. And just like we said, on the other side of the ball, look, Notre Dame, in terms of being able to lean on you and do what they did offensively, unlike anybody else on the schedule, as far as I can tell, this Notre Dame defense, I think, I don't see anybody else on the schedule that's of the same quality as Notre Dame defensively. And, to put up those kind of numbers is a big deal. The big problem is the reason you're giving up all the pressure is you can't run the football. They're going to have to find ways to get some balance and to be creative in the running game to get some balance so that Maye is not basically just having to throw when teams know he has to throw the whole way. The more they can get a little bit of balance, the better. But the fact that, and the other big bright spot, Antoine Green, you guys already mentioned him, 7 targets. A couple of them he probably would say, yeah, I got my fingertips on it. I'd love to have made that catch. Feels like, he left a couple on the table. But the 3 that he did make, 3 catches for 150 yards and a long of 80 yards, it's pretty clear that he, when he was rehabbing that, or when he was letting that collarbone heal, he kept running because he didn't look any slower.
Did he?
He didn't lose a step. So, in terms of what the wide receiver room looks like now, with Antoine Green, Josh Downs back on the field, J.J. Jones made some catches in this game, made a couple big-time catches. And then you have some of those other players. They've got weapons all over the place. And, I said, well, maybe the only other team that can look like Ohio State in that receiver room, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe North Carolina belongs in that same discussion in terms of overall passing game and receiver room. after watching this that, you're looking at that they did a lot more against Notre Dame than Ohio State did in that respect. And I think you've got to look at that as a huge positive moving on.
They have 8 receivers that have at least 100 yards receiving.
Wow.
That's heavy.
4 games into the season, including all 3 tight ends. That doesn't include any of the running backs. DJ Jones would be the 9th person if he catches another 29 yards or whatever.
Wow.
But 8 so far that have at least 100 yards.
Yeah, I was a little surprised. Nesbitt and Morales only combined for 3 catches. Copenhagen not on the stat sheet. I mean, they're going to have to do it. And Jason, you mentioned they're going to have to figure out how to run the ball. I just say go full out Texas Tech with Pat Mahomes. But anyway, Buck, listen, let's get out of here, but let's talk about what's coming up. I don't get to talk to you, but once during the week on these podcasts, Carolina and Virginia Tech, they announced it this morning, 3:30 in Kenan Stadium on the ACC Network next Saturday. I said yesterday, and I said all week leading up to it was a need win for Carolina yesterday. Carolina needed to do something other than what they did. But Virginia Tech comes, and I'm going to do my thing. People are already shouting me out on the boards. Carolina has got to win against Virginia Tech on Saturday.
That's a bad Virginia Tech team. You've got to take care of business there.
If they lose to this Virginia Tech team, then I don't know where it goes from there. I don't think the Titanic can avoid the iceberg if Virginia Tech walks into Kenan Stadium and comes out with the milkshake, like you mentioned, Middle Tennessee State doing. Where are you there? And people are going to get mad watching this podcast saying, "What are you guys laughing about?" And I'm not laughing because it's funny. I can assure you that. I'm laughing because this is a great group to talk Carolina football. But it is it will get really, really bad if Carolina can't get it done against Virginia Tech. What are your pre-week thoughts of that one coming up next Saturday?
Well, I'm going to talk about that one. I'm going to talk about 4 games. Virginia Tech, Virginia, Duke, and Georgia Tech. North Carolina can absolutely not afford to lose any of those games. Those are 4 games on the schedule where the F+ ratings for all 4 of those teams is south of average, like 65th or worse in F+, which is a combination of SP+, and FEI. Anyway, Virginia Tech is not a very good team. Offensively, they are 103rd in the nation, or they were 2 days ago when I wrote this up. So they don't have the offense. If they try to get into a shootout with North Carolina, they're going to lose that shootout. Their defense is decent, is pretty good, but we've seen North Carolina against a decent defense. I don't think Virginia Tech has a better defense than Notre Dame. So in theory, North Carolina should absolutely beat Virginia Tech. And this year in particular, I think to sustain the program momentum and get to where North Carolina wants to be, they cannot afford to have one of these oops games that they're so famous for and have been for the last since Mac's been here. So they need to beat Virginia Tech. They need to beat Virginia. They need to beat Duke, and they need to beat Georgia Tech. That gets them to 7 wins. If you win those 4 games, that adds up, doesn't it, fellas? Am I doing the math
no, that's right? No, that's right. Yeah.
It's not much more complicated than that, right? 7 wins gets you to the bowl season. Maybe you get 8. The other teams you got to play are NC State, Pittsburgh, Miami, and Wake Forest.
All gettable.
If you get 1 or 2 of those games, possibly, then you've had yourself a season. You've had yourself a season. You maybe get to 9 wins. So, but you got to win those gimmies. You got to hit those snowbirds. When you're playing basketball, right? You can't give those up. So Virginia Tech, all important must win Tommy Ashley special next weekend. Let's hope there's not a hurricane in the mix like there was that game that need not be spoken about. It was 16.
Was it 16? Yeah.
Was it Trubisky's
Yeah.
year as a starter?
Yeah.
You cannot. Yeah, if there's supposed to be a hurricane on Saturday and the PTPs don't push that game to Sunday, then that pretty much answers any remaining questions about where this program is. Because if my memory serves, it was absolutely gorgeous on Sunday after that Saturday game, and I think South Carolina moved their game. Whatever. Anyway,
several people did, and North Carolina chose not to.
Yeah, and ate it on
Yeah.
Saturday. On that Saturday, Jason, it's must win, right? It's must win for a ton of reasons. The record probably being the last of them on my list.
Yeah, I mean, this is a program that Virginia Tech's not a good football team right now, and it's a program with a new coach that they're searching for any possible thing that they can sell on the recruiting trail with a new staff. This is where you've absolutely got to kick them when they're down, and you want to kick them and kick them and kick them again, so that you know when they're trying to sell things on the recruiting trail, on their recruiting territory overlaps a lot with Carolina's. You want to make sure that those players who you're competing for understand who the big brother is in that relationship. That you want to absolutely do that. And like Buck said, it's about getting to where you take care of the games that you should win, so that you have 7 wins. You bank those 7 wins, and you're playing with house money the rest of the way, because that's a gettable Miami team, as we just saw. That Pittsburgh team is gettable. That's a good Pittsburgh team, but they're gettable. And that NC State team is the inverse of North Carolina. Their defense is like Carolina's offense, and their offense is like Carolina's defense. So that's going to be a competitive game. So, again, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, coming out of this game, Carolina's still 3-1. Like, this is where you, realistically speaking, coming into the year, I feel like I'm doing Nick Saban thing with the hands. Realistically speaking, coming into the season, if any of us, if Carolina's coaching staff had been told, okay, Carolina's 3-1 with a loss to Notre Dame, where Notre Dame kind of bludgeons you, but you're 3-1 coming out of coming into conference play, you're going to take it?
Yes.
I think every single person, coaches included, knowing what we knew about this Carolina team at the beginning of the year, knowing what we knew about the schedule, would say, yeah, I'll take that. I'll take it. Because, look, this team could absolutely be 2-2 or worse, given some of the injuries that they've had and all of that. They're 3-1 going into conference play in a division and with the schedule that they can win. They can beat every team remaining on the schedule, regardless of what we saw coming in. Now, I'm not feeling real good about that Wake Forest passing game, but you look at the rest of that schedule, and they take care of business at Virginia Tech or against Virginia Tech, and then go on the road to Miami. They've got a chance to put themselves in the driver's seat of the division right there. So yeah, I think it's a must win. I think the program is still, I think this team is still in position to be able to hit every goal that they realistically had coming into the season. They just need to improve in certain areas. And I think, some of that is going to be a matter of embracing the culture that's needed and really seeing some of that accountability and commitment to improving the little things that get you off the field on defense. But this team still has all of its goals in front of it. And I see no reason that they can't actually hit those goals.
They are stacking up dots. Virginia Tech will be another opportunity for a dot. We've had a lot of questions answered. We talked about get-right games. Notre Dame got theirs on Saturday. Can Carolina get theirs next Saturday? We shall see. It is 3-1 going into ACC play, and you're right. Let's be honest. The Coastal sucks, period. And Carolina just needs to stink a little less at times, on especially on one side of the ball, to get it done. Buck Sanders, Jason Staples. Jason, we'll talk later in the week. Buck, I will see you hopefully next weekend down in the Bowls lot. Stay tuned, everybody, for the family of Inside Carolina podcast. Taylor Vipolis with Ingersoll and EJ, Joey and Coast to Coast, On the Beat Live, Game Plan Live, Ross and Schottmer, everything. We got a ton of stuff going on. Taylor and Justin Jackson later in the week. Just a lot going on at Inside Carolina. Johnny T-Shirt's our sponsor. It's always a pleasure.
Peace out.